Welcome to Resistance Live. Since 2017, Resistance Live has been the go-to home for political and legal news and analysis through a decidedly progressive activist lens. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm a former Wall Street and human rights lawyer, a lifelong organizer, and a leadership and impact consultant for all those seeking to lead big progressive change in these incredibly challenging times. To get bonus broadcasts, ask questions, and more, don't forget to become a paid subscriber to the show at patreon.com/resistancelive. And to learn more about what we do to help progressive leaders everywhere, check out GaiaLeadershipProject.com. And now, here's today's show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Resistance Live for the 3rd of December, 2025. I don't think this boat bombing scandal is going away. There is an enormous new discussions about what to do about this situation this morning. And I have to tell you that I think we've reached a point now where we may be tipping into the territory of something that is going to result in a congressional investigation of the entire chain of command. For everybody who has missed it, let's just back up for a second so we can set the context for this. We learned over this past weekend that the very first boat bombing in the Caribbean, I have to point out that the boat bombings, no matter how many times they are hit, are illegal. There is no wartime threat. It is longstanding protocol that if you believe a boat is carrying drugs, you interdict it and board it. That is standard international law. This first boat bombing that took place on September 2nd did result in a second order after the boat was initially struck to murder survivors who were floating in the water, clinging to the wreckage. This double tap, that's what it's referred to, double tap bombing is per se illegal under the Military Code of Conduct, under international law, under the Geneva Convention. There are any number of reasons why this is considered illegal activity, and I went through quite a number of them yesterday. If you missed yesterday's broadcast, you can go back and watch it. The key feature of what's happening in the last 24 hours is that the story of the administration about what happened with this boat bombing has changed multiple times. First, we have heard that it was Pete Hegseth who gave the kill them all order. Then we heard it was Admiral Bradley. Then we heard that Hegseth was watching it while it went down. Then he claimed that he left the room. Yesterday in a cabinet meeting, he claimed he was in the fog of war and he knew better than reporters did. Ironically enough, the reporter who asked him a question that resulted in that answer is an Iraq War veteran himself, an infantry Iraq War veteran. So the story is inconsistent, but the political fallout is starting to really come home to roost. And one of the things that's very apparent from what has happened in the last 24 hours is that the administration knows they are in some deep doohickey. I'm trying to curse here, last you guys. They know they're in trouble. And they know that it's not just Democrats and it's not just the progressive left that are calling this out as murder. It's actually some former officials in the Bush administration. It's actually very senior military leaders. It is raising huge questions about the long-term effect on the careers of the individuals who are involved in this particular event. So the latest on this is that tomorrow, in a closed-door hearing, Admiral Bradley, who the administration is trying to toss under the bus for this, will testify before Congress. Now, this will be closed door. That means no press. But it does mean that there is now a bipartisan investigation underway as to what took place on September 2nd. And we have yet to know what actually is going to take place, what actually the testimony will be. My suspicion is that some version of it will be leaked shortly after the hearing. We'll certainly be hearing from Democratic electeds and maybe some Republicans once the hearing is over. But that's taking place tomorrow. On top of that, there was a very prominent op-ed published late last night in the New York Times that called for an independent special congressional committee, much like what was conducted for January 6th, to be appointed to investigate these boat bombings writ large, not just the one on September 2nd, but every single one that has now killed more than 85 people by the last count. So this is, again, another story that isn't going away. And frankly, I have, I am not ex-military. My dad is ex-military, but I have heard from a number of friends and colleagues over the last couple of days that this particular situation, this illegal order, literally will flow all the way up the chain of command to at least Pete Hegseth. And the question of what comes after that, which could, of course, include impeachment of Pete Hegseth, as we discussed yesterday, is a very serious question. Again, I want people to kind of understand that we don't yet know what the fallout from this is going to be, but it has legs. Even since yesterday, we've seen a number of prominent Republicans, and I listed the ones that we knew about yesterday on yesterday's broadcast, come out and criticize this particular series of events. It is, Pete Hegseth, as I said yesterday, has tried to shitpost his way through this. He cracked jokes over the weekend. Those are now considered to be not just amoral, but probably Exhibit A if he's ever actually impeached or tried, because, by the way, I'm going to remind everybody there's no statute of limitations on murder. This is yet another scandal that is now crossing bipartisan lines. So one of the reasons why it's important to talk about this through the larger lens of what is happening politically is that, as we have been discussing here on the broadcast for about the last month, there are significant cracks beginning to show in MAGA's foundation. I talked about this yesterday as well. With the Epstein files, with the pressure that was brought to bear there, with Thomas Massie going into conjunction with Ro Khanna to get the Epstein Files Transparency Act passed, to the fact that there was so much pressure put on the administration, not just from the left, but also from the right, to get that act passed. That's on top of the fact that there are an enormous number at this point of MAGA podcasters who have announced that they are done with Trump, that they think the Trump presidency is a failure, that the economic results that were promised have not appeared. So now, on top of that, we have Republican leaders coming forward and questioning the actions of Pete Hegseth and the actions of the Department of Defense in undertaking this series of murderous actions on the high seas without provocation or rationale. And I have to say that, every crack in the foundation is another step toward the whole thing eventually coming down. So I do want to remind everybody, I'm going to say, as I said yesterday, there is no such thing as a preemptive pardon. I know there have been discussions of that. If Pete Hegseth is convicted of a crime, eventually down the road, I don't think that's going to happen while Trump is president. But if it does, the next president could potentially pardon him. I don't see Trump doing it. Okay. And if Hegseth is impeached and removed, that is not the equivalent of being convicted of a crime. There's no pardon power that attaches to that. All right. So again, there's a lot happening on this front. It should not be neglected. And we have to put it in the larger context of the ongoing, more and more obvious every day end result of MAGA coming apart at the seams. Okay. Speaking of MAGA coming apart at the seams, yesterday Trump slept through another cabinet meeting. This included a cabinet meeting where Marco Rubio was shouting right next to Trump, and another one where Pete Hegseth was again spouting excuses for murdering people on the high seas. You all know that, as I said yesterday, I expect Trump to be crazy now, and I'm really not fazed by like 100 posts a night on Truth Social or anything like that. I do think, though, there's another interesting thing that's starting to happen here with this, which is that we are finally getting mainstream press coverage of Trump's failing physical and emotional state. This includes, by the way, a piece in the New York Times last week that we discussed here on the broadcast when it came out. But it also includes now mainstream news reporters posting pieces about what he slept through and the fact that he slept through it, and posting photographs of him dozing through the cabinet meeting itself. And again, I just have to remind everybody that the more that this happens and the more that it breaks through in mainstream media, the harder it will be to ignore. I'm also just going to point out one other thing here, because there's one thing I neglected to mention on the boat bombing issue, which is that commentators on Fox News, very conservative, historically MAGA commentators, are out there on Fox saying that the bombings are illegal. So again, we're seeing, yes, there are people who are saying horrific things like Megyn Kelly. Yes, there are people out there, on like Greg Gottfield saying horrific things. But there are also people on Fox News, longtime commentators on Fox News, who are speaking the truth about this and saying this is illegal. It shouldn't have happened. right? So again, that in and of itself is another sign of what's starting to crumble. All right. Somebody asked me a question on the Patreon feed, and I'm going to remind you all, if you are not yet a subscriber, you can become a subscriber over at patreon.com/resistancelive for as little as $5 a month, or right now we're running 20% off annual subscriptions using the code FALL2025. You get to ask me questions for 3 hours before every broadcast, and I will either answer them on the air or in writing. You also get bonus broadcasts every week. Please join us over there. If you are not yet a subscriber, it's what keeps this show afloat. All right. Question over on the Patreon feed this morning about ACA subsidies, because this morning there are a number of Republican reps out there plugging alternative versions of healthcare ideas, separate and apart from extending the ACA subsidies that would allow people like me to actually be able to afford subsidized healthcare next year. I've been very public about this, but I've been on the ACA now really pretty much since its origin as a single mother. My health insurance premiums are going from $1,200 to $2,400 a month in January 1st, unless I choose to get off the exchange altogether and buy private, which will give me, I don't know, less of a degree of service of what I need. Okay. So one of the things that I want people to be aware of here is that the Republicans did promise, nobody expected them to keep this. This is one reason why I was so upset with Democratic leadership at the time, but did promise a vote on extending ACA subsidies when the federal government was reopened last month. Okay. Many folks, including myself, said that that was the dumbest move imaginable by the Democrats because the likelihood that they were going to follow through on a vote was basically nil. Well, lo and behold, we now have the Republicans coming out and saying instead they want to do different things. They want to give American families $5,000. Let me just say something. I will eat my hat if a check for $5,000 comes in the mail for me from the GOP. I highly doubt that that's actually going to happen. But also I want to point out that that then puts the labor of procuring private health insurance on every individual American family who does not have it through employment. Can you imagine the administrative fiasco of this? Do I have time as a single mother and a small business owner to spend hours on the phone negotiating with a variety of insurance companies to figure out the cheaper version of my healthcare, right? And can I just tell you something else? That $5,000 check is not going to cover healthcare for me and my children for more than a quarter of next year, between our actual out-of-pocket costs and the healthcare costs that we're going to be paying. So that's not a good idea. And again, I have to remind people that one of the reasons why we desperately need some form of socialized medicine in this country is because otherwise every single American family will be, if the ACA subsidies aren't extended, and they do this, forced to negotiate for themselves with insurance companies. Has anybody ever tried to negotiate even for an insurance company to cover a test, like an MRI? Because I have. Now imagine you have to do it for everything. It's crazy. This is a terrible idea. And I know there are some people in this audience, including in this audience, who were like, wow, $5,000 check. First of all, I don't think we're going to get it. But second of all, even if we did, the effect of it on American families would be catastrophic. Okay, nobody's got time for this, and insurance companies have all the power. That's the whole reason why the ACA was passed in the first place, right? They do this. The insurance company can jack your health insurance up to $5,000 a month, right? Does everybody understand this? We need the federal subsidies in order to keep the ACA alive. All right. The second thing that I want to say is now this morning, there's another suggestion that's been put out there of giving American families a $25,000 tax deduction, up to $25,000 tax deduction for health insurance costs. Okay. Right now, you can only deduct your health insurance costs if they exceed 7.5% of your gross annual income. All right. The challenge with this, of course, is that it does nothing to health insurance companies. So again, I will point out, you could have an emergency. You could be taken to the hospital. Let's say, God forbid, you have a heart attack or somebody in your family has a stroke, or you have to give birth. Because by the way, my healthcare costs when I gave birth to one of my kids 15 years ago totaled $92,000. All right. I'm lucky I had insurance. I just want everybody to be aware that this promise of, you can deduct $25,000 off your taxes will basically do nothing in the case of an emergency for any American family. So they're trying to spin this as if they are giving Americans cash, or they're giving Americans the equivalent of cash with a tax deduction. But the end result of it is an essentially unregulated health insurance industry, which is exactly what the ACA was designed to stop. And the end result of it for American families will be health insurance costs like you have never seen. So all of this needs to be viewed through the lens of what's actually happening, not just their propaganda, right? We need federal government subsidies of health insurance through the ACA. That is the only way that your health insurance costs will be offset, in other words, by a means through the federal government that will keep your health insurance costs lower, all right? And they're still like unaffordable for many American families. But all that said, please keep in mind that if it sounds too good to be true coming out of MAGA, you know it is, all right? So in any event, we do have an opportunity this week to advocate for the extension of ACA subsidies. You all know I come on here every day and try to give you homework assignments. It is a very good day to call your representatives, call your senator, call your member of the House, and demand the extension of the ACA subsidies, like full stop. Doesn't matter if they're MAGA, doesn't matter if they're Democrat, call and demand it, all right? Really important to do that. Okay, we had some critical elections last night. You all know I've been talking about the Tennessee 7th for quite some time, and while Afton Bain did not manage to pull it out, we did see an enormous swing in that district. That is a district that went by 22 points for Trump in 2024. It went by 9 points last night for Van Epps, who was the Republican challenger to Afton Bain. This, again, I just have to point this out. I'm not alone in saying this. This is what a lot of people were saying last night. That kind of a swing, that's a swing of 13 points in the space of a year, should have every single government official, GOP elected who won by less than 10 points shaking in their boots, okay? If we can do that in deep red Tennessee in a gerrymandered district, we can flip any seat nationwide where Republicans won by 10 points or less. And that really has to be the thing that we focus on now, truly. Like, we have to be focused as we head into 2026 on flipping every possible seat that we can. I also do want to point out there was really good news out of Georgia. Roswell, Georgia, which I believe is like the 9th largest city in Georgia, managed to oust their old school white guy mayor last night in favor of a woman who is a healthcare practitioner. One member of our community here was actually actively involved in that campaign. And that also is now the third major flip in the state of Georgia since the beginning of November. So there continue to be very big signs of change in deep red locations. And that alone should be enough to kind of like get us motivated to get working for 2026. Okay. Some other news this morning, just before I went on the air, Judge Howell in DC stopped, full stop, all warrantless arrests of immigrants in the District of Columbia unless there is proven evidence that the particular person is a flight risk. This is a huge deal, by the way, because as we know everywhere, there have been efforts to use racial profiling to just randomly arrest brown people, Spanish-speaking people, Black people, and stick them on a plane and deport them to God knows where. What this ruling says now, thanks to Judge Howell, Beryl Howell, who is a very famous, well-known judge in the DC District Court where I practiced for many years, stops that in its tracks. They have to have a judicially executed warrant to arrest anyone unless that person is an imminent flight risk. And I got to tell you, I don't know how you're an imminent flight risk if you're trying not to leave the country, right? So this is a very strong decision. Yes, of course, it will be appealed to the DC Circuit, but it's really good. Like, again, we got to take our wins where we can find them. Speaking of ICE, there have been a series of really horrifying ICE raids in Minneapolis over the last couple of days. If you have not been following this, ICE in Minneapolis and CBP are expressly targeting Somali immigrants. By the way, if you missed the part of yesterday's cabinet meeting where Trump went on an absolutely foul, racist rant about Somalis in the United States, including Ilhan Omar, just know this, like, it was the kind of language that not only smacked of the worst of, the enslaved South or Nazi Germany that you've ever heard. But it also was like yet another true hoods off moment. Like, you know, we don't want them here, right? Lots of things being said about Somalis that I just am not going to repeat on this broadcast. So this kind of targeted racial profiling to arrest people based on how they look or the accent they speak with has already been ruled in other parts of the country to be illegal. My hope is that we will have litigation pending on this in Minnesota like today, because again, these have been incredibly brutal and violent arrests, complete with, again, smashing out car windows, stopping and arresting people on the street. And there is no respite from this unless and until the courts step in and, you know, truly stop it, as Howell has done this morning in DC. All right, we have one more bit of bad news this morning, which is that this morning, Donald Trump pardoned ex-Texas House of Representatives member Henry Cuellar, who was convicted of taking $600,000 in bribes from foreign entities. You may remember him as a moderate Democrat. And at the time that he was arrested and charged and eventually forced out of office, there was a lot of celebrating on the Democratic side because we don't tolerate that nonsense. Well, he is fully welcomed back into MAGA now. The president announced it this morning with, "I don't know you, but I'm glad you're free." And again, I have to point out that this is yet another signaling to any member of any party that if they take bribes from foreign entities under Trump and they are convicted of that, they will be pardoned. So it's very bad news. And I also have to point out, this is not hypocrisy, it's hierarchy. They are saying that people that they consider to be a part of who they are don't have to abide by the law, and the law will be rigorously applied to everybody else, right? They'll call Hunter Biden corrupt. They'll claim that they can bomb boats in the Caribbean for drug smuggling, but they will pardon actual drug traffickers who dumped 400 million pounds of cocaine inside the United States. This is hierarchy, okay? It's not hypocrisy. It's hierarchy. So again, you know, not great news on that front. Okay, speaking of which, I had a question this morning off the Patreon feed, which is a good question, okay? And again, this comes up from time to time where folks start to get really discouraged, where it feels like nothing is making a dent. And so I do have to point out, you know, as I started the broadcast, and I want to repeat here, there are significant signs of damage inside MAGA right now. Bigger ones than we have seen actually in a really long time. You know, the Epstein files are due to be released on the 19th of December, 20th at the latest, okay? So we're looking right now at, you know, 15 days till that happens, 16 days. That's a very big deal. And, you know, that happened through bipartisan effort. We had incredible wins in the election in November. I know everybody has memory hold that already, but it's literally less than a month since that happened, okay? We also have seen during that time incredible devolution in the underlying base of MAGA. I have to point out to everybody, 81% of the country thinks Trump is hiding something in the Epstein files. More than 60%, in some cases 70% of the country are incredibly disappointed with the results of on the economy. Trump's own overarching approval ratings are routinely in the low 30s, if not high 20s right now. So one of the things that I think we have to remember here is that the reason why there is so much bad news and so much acting out and so much overt violence against marginalized people right now is because they know they're losing, right? And the bad news about this is the violence is going to get worse because they are all cornered rats right now. In fact, many of them are starting to recognize that they're going to have criminal liability when this is all over. And that is going to cause them to act in ways to try to suppress dissent, to try to divide people, to try to exercise violence in ways that would attempt to shut people up so that they can cling to power with like the tiniest shred of their fingernails. But I got to tell you all, I think 2026 is going to be a watershed year. In fact, I'm recording a video about this for our sister channel, the Ripple Effect Institute, which will be coming out on Monday. I think that we are going to see very significant shifts, frankly, in how everything looks by this time next year. And that's on top of the fact that Trump is clearly unwell mentally and physically, on top of the fact that we have big rifts forming in his underlying elected base, meaning like, you know, there are hardcore far-right GOP members fleeing the support of him, like Thomas Massie. We've got, you know, the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee calling out Hegseth's actions as illegal. There are multiple signs right now that would move us in the direction of being hopeful. All right. And one thing that I have to warn everybody about here, by the way, which I think is really important. Okay. Because I have to say this because sometimes people on the left, commentators on the left, even people on the left who are doing really good work, do not think strategically about how they are messaging things. So for instance, if you see someone, claiming that there is a fear of violence from the MAGA base. All right. One thing I want you to think about is, what does that message say to people who are trying to get out and vote? What does that message say to people who are trying to influence their electeds, right? Does it say to those people, it's okay for you to vote? Does it say to those people, it's okay for you to advocate? Does it encourage courage in our elected officials? Okay? Because if it isn't doing that, if it is creating excuses or setting up signs of like fear of violence, if it is actually kind of like endorsing stochastic terrorism, it's not doing a public service from a messaging standpoint. And I'm not going to knock, there's somebody being mentioned in the comments, I'm not going to knock that person's greater public service, but I am going to say this. I don't care, frankly, at this point, whether or not MAGA elected officials are worried about their base, right? They have a choice to make right now. Are they going to go down with the Titanic? Or are they going to flee the ship before their own criminal liability becomes so great that we're looking at Nuremberg trials? And I think a lot of folks, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, as the canary in the coal mine, are evaluating whether or not they want to ride this ship to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. So again, their job as electeds is to stand up and do the right thing. And I know that may be like pie in the sky values shit that we thought was long gone, but it is time. It has been time for a long time already. And it's really important that we push our elected officials, particularly when it comes to like murdering people on the high seas, right? Or for that matter, covering up for like the nation's potentially largest sex trafficking scandal ever, to actually do the right thing by the people who voted for them. Okay. So, there's a lot of reason to not be discouraged right now. In other words, there's a lot of reason right now to start actually seeing the signs of disarray inside MAGA and figuring out how you are going to be a part of the solution of exploiting those so that we run like all the way over these people in the 2026 midterms. Because I'm going to remind you, we take back the House and potentially the Senate, which people are now talking about. I got to tell you, that's a reach, but we do that. People can be impeached, right? Investigations can be started in the House. I'm not saying we're going to have a 2/3 majority necessary to remove people from office in the Senate, but you never know how winds are going to shift in the next year. So again, this is the moment to actually like get on board with figuring out what role you are going to play in 2026. And that's the video we have coming up on Monday. So you can like stay tuned for that. And please subscribe to our sister channel, the Ripple Effect Institute, which is like my day job and where we do all this work of working with, emerging activists, visionary leaders on how to really become empowered to do incredible generation changing work right now. All right. That's it for today. Lots of love to all of you. Please subscribe to this channel if you have not already done so. Please, 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 if this work is meaningful to you, become a paid subscriber over at patreon.com/resistancelive. You can also gift subscriptions for the holidays. Your paid subscriptions are what keep this broadcast afloat because my YouTube ad revenue does not cover my grocery bill. I am not some 5 million subscriber person making 250 grand a month. That is not me. So please become a paid subscriber at Patreon to help keep this show going, to help me pay my tech team behind the scenes. We are so grateful for all of you. And I will catch you all back here tomorrow. And there will be a broadcast on Friday along with a bonus broadcast for our Patreon subscribers only. All right. I'll see you all back here tomorrow. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for being here at Resistance Live. To get more out of the show, including bonus broadcasts, the answers to all your most pressing political and legal questions, and way more, head on over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber. And don't forget to hit subscribe here on your favorite podcasting platform to make sure that you never miss an episode. See you next time.